Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial from ADSR and MassiveSynth.com. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel and you want to stay current on all of our videos and tutorials we're putting out, you can do that at youtube.com/ADSRtuts. So this is part 3 in a series that I started on some of the effects in Massive and how you can use them to kind of beef up your sounds. Part 1 and part 2 will have links in the description. And they covered the dimension expander and the reverb, and then part 2 covered the delays in Massive, so more of the spatial effects. Today we're going to be covering the distortion effects in Massive and how you can use those to kind of beef up lead sounds, make things thicker, and just you can kind of see visually and hear what they do and how they affect the sound. So we have this kind of a we have a super saw-ish sound loaded up that we've been using in the course of these 3 little tutorials. And there's the sound. And so jumping right into it, Massive gives you 3 distortion effects that you can use in the master effects section. They are the classic tube, the Tele tube, and the Brauner tube. And if you do want to use these on your sounds, just a little tip, you cannot insert them on FX2. So if you want to have distortion on your sound, make sure you're doing that in FX1. I can't tell you how many times I put my reverb or delay or something like that on FX1, and then I was like, oh, it'd be cool if I could put on distortion on this to beef it up, and then I can't. And Massive doesn't have like a copy and paste for your effects like some synths do, so then you have to go in and remake it. So first is the classic tube. The name is a reference to just your standard tube sound, so it's going to add an overdrive. It's kind of like an overdrive sound. And if you turn the dry wet all the way up and keep the drive down, it doesn't affect the sound at all. It doesn't do anything. Keeps the volume the same, doesn't have any effect. Like some of the effects, if you just turn the dry wet up, it'll either lower the volume or it'll have like a low pass filter or a sweep or something like that going on. But not the case with the classic tube. So if you turn the dry wet up about halfway and the drive halfway, here's the difference in sound. Now that's a pretty crazy distortion when you have it all the way up, 100% wet, 100% up on the drive. It is, for a lead sound specifically, I'd be hard-pressed to hear how I could use it in the context of a mix in a song. On a bass sound, though, that's a whole other story. Like on a wobble, that'd be a sweet effect. So let me open up another instance of Massive, and I will grab a wobble. So here we are at this wobble, and I have the classic tube on it already. Now let me turn that off. So it's kind of a slow moving wobble. Now I turn this classic tube on. You can hear that difference. So for wobbles, basses, growls, things like that, the classic tube, because when you have the dry wet all the way up, it's such a drastic sound. It's a great tool for those types of sounds. But again, for leads, pads, anything like that, it would be it's kind of hard to incorporate it at where you have your dry and wet, or you have a really wet signal, or you have the drive really high. So going back to our super saw sound. So you can kind of hear how this sounds specifically. It makes it bigger, but it also makes it kind of muddier. So what you can do is you can use a envelope to control when it's letting through the distortion. So we have a really percussive sound. I would want, it's a pretty quick sound, so what that's doing is basically, so I used my third envelope just because 1 and 2 were taken. 1 was doing something on my low pass filter, and 2 also I had set up to filter 2, but I'm not really using it right now. So I just used envelope 3. And what you can do is with this, like let's say you want to play a percussive quick sequence. but you want that distortion coming through on it, but you don't want the distortion being too heavy of effect or ringing out on the sustains of your notes. You can control how much distortion is let through by modulating with your envelope through the attack, the sustain, the decay, all that. So it's really helpful if you're trying to really sculpt the sound of the distortion. So next we can pull up the Tele tube, and let's turn the drive and the dry and wet and the drive all the way up. So it's again pretty drastic effect. And it sounds pretty darn close to the classic tube. The only difference I can hear, and I don't know if you'll be able to hear this after this video is uploaded to YouTube, but it sounds like there's a little bit more high end let through on the classic tube. Sounds like the Tele tube's a little bit kind of muddier, but not necessarily a bad way. So next we have the Brauner tube. This is an interesting one. So there's Brauner, and we'll go back to Tele. Here's classic. I'll run through all three. So to my ear, the Brauner tube is actually kind of taking out some of the low range frequencies. So this one automatically lends itself to lead sounds. And again, using an envelope to control how much of it you're hearing. So that's kind of a helpful one just because it kind of takes out some of the low. So for instance, a lead sound, I might end up cutting out some of the low end EQ anyway. So that's kind of helpful. That's a good one I like to use a lot on lead sounds. So apart from those three distortion effects that you can put on the master effects section, Massive also gives you some, they're not necessarily distortion emulations per se, but they do distort up and grid up the sound. They give you the sine shaper, the parabolic shaper, and the hard clipper. So let me load up the sine shaper. You can already hear how that's a huge, drastic effect. And if you just turn the dry wet up, you can kind of hear that the volume of your signal starts to decrease. The reason for that is as you turn the drive up, the volume will start to increase. So that's kind of a nifty little feature so if you're turning up the dry wet a good amount and you have the drive up a good ways too, you're not going to be clipping over here in your master section. The sine shaper is one of my favorite effects for just thickening up like a super saw sound. So here it is off. My cutoff is pretty open. Now I'm just gonna turn this on. I like that just because it adds an interesting sound to a really overplayed sound in the super saw, which I always like trying to find ways to make very common sounds a little bit more interesting. So next is the parabolic shaper. Another really good one for lead sounds, and specifically super saw sounds. I mean, that could just be the one thing if you've ever had like a super saw sound that just isn't cutting through your mix. Just try turning on the parabolic shaper and throwing it on, or your lead sound, or anything that just needs a little bit more. It's a great tool and a great way to make a sound just a little bit bigger. So next and last is actually the hard clipper. This is a great effect for lead sounds, even for basses that have too much mud and too much bass to them, and you kind of need to cut that out, or just add a little bit of top end so it kind of sits above your kick. Even with the dry wet and the drive all the way up, it is a fairly subtle effect. When you're comparing it to the Sine Shaper, I mean, that just hurts my ears. It's probably one of the more subtle ones in your insert slots of the three I'm showing you today. And like I said, it's just great for making your leads a little bit bigger, your pluck sounds a little bit more percussive, and kind of snap through your mix. So that pretty much covers the 3 distortion effects that Massive has to offer, and then the 3 kind of shaping tools that you can put on your insert slots in Massive. So just to recap real quick, the inserts, the parabolic shaper and the hard clipper are great for lead sounds. The sine shaper is great for basses because it's affecting the sine wave. It's playing with this, the fundamentals of the wave, which is just great for basses. And then the classic and Tele tube, there's not a huge difference between. One's just has a little bit more top end to my ears, and then there's that Brauner tube, which I like for lead sounds. So thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and I'll try to get back to them as soon as I can. And if you haven't checked out MassiveSynth.com, head on over there. We have tons of tutorials, literally everything about Massive. And then there's also some really cool sound sets and some video courses and things like that. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.